शॉट वन टेक वन। हेलो दोस्तों, मैं हूँ मीरा देवी, खबर लहरिया से ब्यूरो चीफ। मेरे शो राजनीति रस राय में आप सबका एक बार फिर से बहुत बहुत स्वागत है।
So welcome, Sushmit and Rintu. We've been wanting to get this film since 2021, when we heard of this amazing two awards at Sundance. And then we were following the journey on Facebook and seeing you picking up one award after the other and answering questions on the Zoom room. So I'm really glad that you're both here in person today. And thank you so much for coming all the way from Delhi just for this screening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So when I was looking at your synopsis, it doesn't say anything about rural journalism or caste identities, but you talk about that it's about an exploration of truth, justice, power. And I think it's a very interesting, the usage of the word power, because in that power, you've actually brought about all these various dynamics that one is looking at, whether it's about patriarchy, caste, societal, also political parties. But all this we see, and I think you saw also in the 4 years that you spend filming the journalists and in Uttar Pradesh. But what is the film that you set out, or what is the film you had in mind when you first approached them?
It's never clear.
Okay.
And I think we got invited to a meeting that the reporting team was doing in Chitrakoot. And that's, we just carried our cameras, and our sound equipment. And it was 3 of us, Sushmit, me, and Karan, our co-cinematographer. And, the idea was to meet everybody and see, because the premise of the story was very interesting. It spoke very strongly to us. We saw a photo story online on the work of Khabar Lahariya, and the fact that a women-led organization, news organization in Uttar Pradesh had existed, thrived for 14 years, was just, there's a lot of things that are operative there. So when we met the team in Delhi, they invited us to this meeting. And we thought, okay, since we're going, and it never happens that you take your cameras on a first research recce trip, but because we were making the journey, we said, is that okay, we film? And they were absolutely fine with it. And I think the meeting women, there was a very powerful moment, because it sort of fed into our own interest of making films. We've been short filmmakers, non-fiction short filmmakers a really long time, made around 150 shots. And we're both very interested in the idea of the role of a woman's voice in a democracy. What does that look like? And women in positions of leadership, whether it's village panchayats or the ASHA workers, or, a lot of our work has existed in that space. And so it was another set of really intelligent women who approached journalism with a kind of intellect yet you missed seeing in mainstream newsrooms. And so we thought, why don't we film them? If we make a film, we'll use it. Otherwise, we'll just give it to them as archival, because it was a pretty historic meeting of just making this transition. And I think that meeting solidified a lot of things for us. And it could be taking place in any, broadsheet conference room in the world. Could be a WAPO office, and the same conversation we'll be having. And so the idea that we set off with was, there was a lot of cinematic possibility, both in visually and in terms of drama, where there was, you could see that there's a clash between belief and disbelief, between this very systemic rigidity that patriarchy brings, and which is in the antiforce to that is a woman's voice and her agency, between a very shape-shifting, cruel system of oppression and the unfettered versus the unfettered, I'd say, power of the digital medium. So those are the things that really spoke to us, and we wanted to explore more. At the same time, we felt very intuitively that the energy or the emotional strength of the film had to come from intimacy. And that's where the 3 women we were able to identify. We could have turned the camera on any of those 23 women and there was a film. But that's, I would say, the initial engine of wanting to spend more time with the women was that. It wasn't honestly the journalism. It was really like, as women, where do you get this spirit from? Where are you going? And can I be on that journey with you? And then the external world starts seeping into the story.
I think that's a very interesting response, because it really comes through all these things that you're saying, that you wanted to follow these 3 women and get into their journey and then slowly bring in the external world. But I suppose Meera was an obvious choice to start with. But what about Sunita and Shyamkali, who in the beginning is so innocently saying she's never used a phone and she's so scared to touch a phone, and then she's later talking about angles or kaise batana chahiye. So, Can you just talk a little bit about process as to how you chose your characters? And the other thing also which I want to talk about process is that, so here are these very young women who've never used a camera before and are training to be video journalists, wanting to learn more advanced tropes of editing and cinematography as we see. And they are coming into not conflict, into communication, let's say dialogue with both of you who are filmmakers. You are kind of on the other side where you've already learned this aspects about how to tell a story visually. So I suppose you both inspired each other in different, but I think very similar ways also. So can you talk about that process of those 4 years?
I think
Short.
my favorite anecdote for this would be we by default had to be a really small crew on ground, so there was just 3 of us. And so we had to, double up as director, cinematographer, or director, producer, sound recordist, etc. Rintu hated doing location sound because Banda in itself is a very loud space. And it's a bit of an out-of-body experience going into Banda because the decibel levels hit you because everyone has their hands on a pressure horn and everything that moves over there has a pressure horn attached to it. Like even cycles have, it's true, they have a little dynamo, so as they're moving, they have a pressure horn on a bicycle. So, so doing sound over there is a big challenge. And I think she spent about a year and a half really struggling. But her journey coming to terms with that tech was Shamkali's journey coming to terms with. Because eventually both Karan and I were like, you don't have an excuse if Shamkali is doing it. And then she stopped cribbing about it. I think, it was, the learning curve for us was massive. You, of course, always go into these spaces with your own understanding of what these spaces are meant to be and these folks are supposed to look like, feel like, etc. And having worked all across the country, specifically with women in leadership positions, we had a sense of what we were getting into. But I think that we weren't prepared for a lot of things that happened along the way, in terms of just 2017 being such an inflection point with Adityanath coming to power and all of them having to recalibrate and re-strategize. And it wasn't just about how do we work on the ground as digital journalists, but how do we work as sophisticated digital journalists with a clear strategy in place, right? How did we meet Sunita and Shamkali? Well, in the first meeting, I think collectively all of us fell in love with Sunita. She was constantly challenging everyone in the room. She's such an anti-establishment player. And she was a maverick. She was the youngest journalist and someone who really would speak her truth. It's as simple as that, irrespective of who you are. And in terms of dramaturgy, like we were looking for the Holy Trinity, 3 characters. And over here, Meera automatically was going to be the Sutradhar. Sunita was an interesting foil character because it was a classic mentor-disciple relationship. And the big conversation within Khabar Lahariya was, can we train a next line of leadership? People like Sunita. And then there was Shamkali, who in the first meeting says, I don't know what a phone is, and we were like, wow, and there was another lady, Shiv Devi, who had but Karan and Rintu were like, we have to go with Shamkali. And so what we did was, the first time we were there, we spent 5 days with them on the ground, wrecking, which basically meant Rintu and Karan would be one film crew and follow one journalist through their news reporting cycle, out follow another. And we would keep shifting between journalists. So on any given day, between the 3 of them, there'd be 2 of us following. And we were traveling really to the back of beyonds of those parts of UP. And every day, the stories were like moving at such pace, right? From the mining mafia, to corruption in the administration, to education, to water, to electricity. And the elements for a very dynamic and cinematic story were in place. So when we came back with 5 days worth of material, there was just so much. we knew who our characters were. The only thing to do was essentially start following them and see where this would lead.
And they were completely okay with you following them and being in
I mean,
their
there's an
house.
interesting story there with
I
Sunita.
think the timing of it was so, it was like meta, right? Them sort of understanding the language of visual storytelling, and understanding the power of the frame and of being in front of behind, and we're sort of like framing that. So I think of all the films that we've made, the conversations around access and consent were most informed in this one. Because here are people who can self-represent and who are understanding the dynamics of an edit, of a shot, where you keep your camera, who are you excluding, who are you including. So in terms of the 4 years of, what can we film, how do we behave as a unit? Because a lot of times they are going into the field and we are following them. So we created a code of, if you think we shouldn't come, you let us know in advance. Or if you've come, then how do we, at what point do we introduce ourselves? And make sure that people who you are filming understand that we are not a part of the KL team. We're different. And part of that was obvious because KL doesn't have men. But a lot of times, these are media dark villages. These are villages where not having a hand pump is a big issue. But that's not newsworthy for mainstream media. And so people are desperate for a city, team to tell their story. So we had to make it very clear that we're not doing your story. We're making a film on her. It's possible that your story becomes a part of our story, but we can't promise anything. So these things became, and then access and consent. With Meera, it was like, she was very open right from the beginning. She invited us home maybe on the 3rd day. That interview where she's talking about her husband not being approving of her career choice, he's sitting right there. So she kind of like owns her story. Shamkali also was just like, come home, meet my family. With Sunita, she was like, you can film me during work hours, but no coming home. I don't want to be shot at home. And we respected that, and we felt like we still want you in the film, so that's fine. And it's almost a year later where she said, do you want to come home? And invited us over, and that sequence with her father happened there. And I feel like it is the longevity of the process that allowed us and her to give us access on her own terms, at her own time, which really informs the emotional energy of the film.
So this kind of leads into my next thought, is that you were doing location sound, and Sushmit, you don the hat of cinematographer for a lot of your projects. And I think maybe people are aware, but the fact is that this is not like where you have the luxury to create your mise-en-scène, to decide you're going to put a soft light here, give somebody a warm glow there. It's like a war situation. These women are going into a minister's office, into a man who's holding a sword in a small room, a politician. So you have to act and think very quickly on your feet. But I noticed that often you have 2 cameras. You're able to shoot from both sides. And I was actually quite surprised how nobody seems very bothered at all about the camera. So I was wondering that, is there also, one is what was the experience of thinking and acting on your feet, but do you also think that the women were gaining more confidence from the fact that here they were also being photographed and they were the subject of a story, so that gave them a further boost to their journalism?
We've been asked this question a lot of times, and honestly, I don't have an answer to this. But I think, especially in the first year, it was a huge learning curve for most of the journalists on the ground. For example, if you're reporting from a village and somebody is actually giving you a quote about a politician, and it's an anonymous quote in a print newspaper, but the moment the camera is up, and so the journalists were just like, should we be rolling this, or how do we anonymize this? Do we have the consent to blur their face, but those conversations were playing out. But I think in terms of process, one of the things that was really clear very early on was we wouldn't have the luxury of a bigger camera. We imagined that we would be filming this in 4K, but with the proper sound team, with the boom mic, all of that, we had to go back to the good old 5D DSLR because it's so small that people don't take you seriously. So many times you would walk into these offices and people were like, "Kya kar rahe aap?" So, "हम इन पे film बना रहे." First question was like, "इस चीज़ से बना रहे?" I was like, "हाँ बना रहे." And then the second question was like, "Why are you making a film on these women?" You know, so there is a certain joy also in not being taken too seriously, especially when you're going into hostile spaces. I think in terms of just creating a visual language for the film, one of the things that we were very clear about was, to actually try and have as long a take as possible without cuts. So, for instance, you will notice, or you might have noticed in the scene where Sunita is cornered by the side of the road, where this man is heckling her. So Karan and Rintu were there, and Rintu told Karan to film the whole thing as one scene, one shot being one scene, where the camera is essentially on Sunita's face most of the times, and you can always relate to the energy that's coming from the other space, and it's reflected of Sunita, So these were some of the strategies that we were always using. We didn't have the luxury of even having a therma board for bouncing light, So our kits would essentially be 2 knapsacks with 2 camera bodies in it, and there's a space to have a tele lens, a 7200. One of our bags would be sort of missing that tele lens because you'd put a water bottle over there, because there were no spaces on the ground where you could go into these spaces and have a meal, because the schedule was the journalists leave their home at about 5:36 in the morning and are on the road through the day, and they're not eating or drinking because there are no public facilities for women, So you're on the road, and they're coming back home, making a meal, and that's the dinner. So it's essentially a meal a day. That was the structure that we were also sort of working with. And you had to carry light, pack essentials, because there was a lot of walking involved. And these are spaces that really burn you up once you're walking in the summer heat. So I think the challenge, of course, was how do you film in an environment that is so dusty, so noisy, and so sunny? But we were able to sort of create a mechanics to it. And most of the scenes, and I'm so happy to hear you say there are 2 cameras, most of the scenes are 1 camera. And that was the other thing, like how do you do coverage for a scene where you need to create a beginning, middle, and an end? Because you were always following one journalist and split. So, so yeah, those are some of the things that we did. But I think we, in the early years, bounced off each other's energies, the journalists and us. And I think that facilitated a lot of the access into these villages. But as Rintu was saying, more than people saying, "Aap kaun hai," it was more like, "Aap hamari kahani bata dijiye." Because the camera over there is seen as a tool of justice seeking. Bada camera hai, so if it's a bigger camera, means a big news agency from the city has come. And there are men, so they will tell our story. Because that space is also highly dominated by male journalists. And, and it was interesting to see how in 4 years, that transition happened. And one of my favorite scenes in the film that, in the rough cut that didn't make it, was all the male journalists are sitting in this small chai shop. The very men you see who were mansplaining Sunita after the police station, this is not how you do reporting. And they're looking at the Sunita show on their phone, and Sunita's not around, and the camera's on them, and they're all mic'd up, and they're going, "This is brilliant. How did she manage to get this? That is a great take." But the moment Sunita walks in, they're just like, "Bahan, ye acha to kiya hai, but the soundtrack could have been better, like Z News, But it didn't make it because this is as much that you can put in 90 minutes. But we saw this huge transition in the way they were reporting, their confidence levels, and the quality of journalism itself. Yeah.
So you met cinematographer and sound recordist. Also meet the editors of the film. So 4 years of filming was not enough. They couldn't get any rest, and they had to go into 18 months of edit. What was the edit like? I mean, you've shot for 4 years, which is not a short period at all. It's a period that's moving from when they don't know how to use a camera to be able to get more than 1 million views on YouTube, starting a channel, and you've covered that whole story in 90 minutes. So what was the edit room like?
Very intense. We're also married, so that complicates everything. And we didn't want to edit the film. We wanted, because we were so close to everything, we felt like a fresh pair of eyes needed to be editing it. We cast a very wide net. But with all the conversations that we were having with editors, it wasn't about their skill set or no, it wasn't. It was just like we felt like the way we were seeing the story, nobody else was. And sometimes that's a benefit. Sometimes you just want to hand over the edit and say, see something new. But this film, the story felt always so intersectional from the beginning. It was about so many things. And you could use the same material, make a very dense, heavy film, and we wanted it to be imbued by the lightness of the women that we were interacting with on an everyday basis. You really need to be matter of fact, witty, and all of that they are to keep going. And yet, it's about a lot of things. So, in terms of process, Sushmit sort of like in 2019, we became like two separate units and started looking at the footage, creating little scenes. And in 2020 is when we actually started putting things together. And the process really was to, once we figured that it feels like the story is in place, dive deep into the footage, just sit with it and let connections that were not so obvious emerge. And that takes so much labor and time. It cooks, it brews. Your footage can be very deceiving because there's tons of it. You think mil gaya, and then it plays out on the edit and you're just like, no, it's not really working. Or you find like gems, like that whole angle thing. It was a part of a long scene where these two are just sitting and chatting. It was because we're all tired. The cameras are just rolling because they're sitting. And she was giving feedback. And so in my head, I didn't remember it as a exciting shoot day. So we didn't even look at that folder for a really long time till we did. And this little gem, emerged. And when we sort of started making the interconnections, it felt there were so many stories that the women had reported on. And we arrived at a space where we felt like the stories where you see the personality of the reporter emerge will stay. So as Meera reporting on a sexual violence is really about her compassion, the way she approaches, the building trust, is the way Sunita reports on a road, mining, the kind of personal risk that she's taking to do that. And the way she navigates the world of male dominated media, and then Shamkali's own arc coming to her. So that really pushed the narrative. And then as the film was getting together, and we used to talk to other filmmakers because this is such a lonely enterprise. And a lot of times people are like, but guys, this doesn't feel like a journalism film. Because usually the format is, it's either like one journalist around whom, there's a personality. There'd be a Maria Ressa in 1,000 Cuts, or a Ravish in While We Watched. Or that's generally how journalism films are.
There's so many moments where you've shown extracts from YouTube and how things have changed. The road has gotten built, medicines for tuberculosis.
The impact was so much
impact,
important. And then there is the kind of films, where a newsroom is working on a big story, like The Collective. But this was neither. And it was really important for us to make those connections and to keep it soft enough for an Indian audience to be open to understanding parts about us that are hard. And yet at the same time for an international audience to be able to access the film, to enter the film with us in that disruptive way, and just enter the world and find their bearings and just go on a journey.
I think you've created a fantastically seamless film which has very intimate, endearing moments, and you're constantly at the edge of the seat, on your seat, waiting to see what's coming next. So really, congratulations on that. And the audience is also going to have a chance to ask questions, but before I open it to audience, there's one criticism about the film that I think I would like to bring up, where Khabar Leheria felt that maybe you have not been able to address the heterogeneity of the journalists, or the fact that you've chosen to focus on one political party, and that maybe that might not be the truth of what was happening in Uttar Pradesh at the time. So I actually am coming from a space where I honestly want to give you a genuine platform to be able to speak about this, because I think these, like, as a filmmaker myself, I think these are the questions you want to ask about why are these the choices that one ends up making, and how do we then negotiate what happens to the film after?
I mean, yeah, it's a if I had a penny for every time I was asked this question post, you know, but I think I'll just dial back a bit to just walk you through our collective journeys. So we met the team at Khabar Lahariya in 2016 in their Delhi office, and they asked us to meet the team in the UP office, which is essentially the ground reporters around whom the film is built. And our first day of meeting them was incidentally the first day we ended up filming with them, where Mira's making a pitch to shift to digital. Never usually happens with us. Like, you know, when you're on a rec, you're essentially talking to people instead of, but the meeting in itself was so historic. And then began this process of like filming. We imagined this would be a 2-year project, because till then we had only done shorts, and shorts ranged from 3 months to 6 months, you know, so 2 years for us was a big ambitious thing. It turned out to be a 5-year thing. Also, by the end of the first year, I think the reporters had given up on us. They were just like, "Kitna time lagaoge banane mein film?" Like, you know, it doesn't, because their news cycles were 24 hours, 48 hours. So their sense of like what the story would be like, you've got the story, right? We've reported, you filmed it. What are you waiting for? And I think one of the important things that we did with them was we were constantly talking about our lens and how we were telling this story, and how things were dramatically changing in India. There are a lot of things that you can put in a film that buff up a film and make it look, add a lot of zest to it, you know, for lack of a better word. You know, scenes that are very delicious and juicy. But a lot of times that can also tend to sort of put at risk the work of participants that you're filming yourselves. And this is a constant conversation that we also had with them in terms of exposure. Because at that point in time, we didn't imagine that the film would have this kind of a run. We'd always been ambitious about where we'd want the film to start off. But we never had an idea it would go on to become like an Academy-nominated film, and the kind of media exposure that comes with that. But I think Khabar Lahariya also interestingly was in a space where they wanted that visibility. It's always a double-edged sword, right, visibility, but they were known in a very liberal part of, you know, Indians, you know, Bombay, Delhi, English-speaking niche journalistic circles, the development sector, but not the kind of scale that you would want for a newsroom. And after the 5th year, once we had finished the film and we were in the throes of the pandemic and the film got selected to Sundance, it was important for us to screen the film for our participants in person. We wanted to do it in person rather than sharing a link. So we found a way to get into Uttar Pradesh. It's a 600-kilometer journey, and I don't know if you can play this clip. Can it be cute? So basically, let me give you a context to the setting. We are in this little hut, and we had Meera, Shamkali, Kavita, who were co-founder, managing editor, senior reporter at the paper, who were watching the film, because Sunita had seen the film with us in Delhi. And I personally was wondering how they would respond to it, because not only are they astute journalists, but they are very aware of what image making is. But I think more personally, I felt that the version of me 5 years ago might not necessarily be the version that I agree with right now. And to see that captured on screen and watch it is an interesting moment, personally, for me. And that is what I was looking at. Like, how are they going to respond to this? The journalism thing is fine, but like as people, because, you know, Meera's personal story, Sunita's personal story, Shamkali's personal story is all here. And as the credits played, like there's a lot of sniffling, clapping, hugging, and then they all gave us these beautiful sound bites. And Kavita went on to say something. Can we play Kavita's piece?
Yeah, Manas, can we play that clip?
कैसे लगा आपको? आपने अभी फिल्म देखी?
तो मुझे बहुत अच्छी लगी ये फिल्म और मुझे बहुत गर्व है इस फिल्म को देख करके कि खबर लहरिया का इतिहास रचा गया है, जिसको रिंटू, सुष्मित और करण ने रचा। और इतनी मेहनत के साथ में फिल्म तैयार हुई और कई जगह मुझे आंसू भी आ रहे थे फिल्म को देख करके, और बहुत मज़े भी मैं कर रही थी, देख रही थी। और ये भी ना कि खबर लहरिया को लोग जिस तरह से देखते हैं तो कई बार लोगों को नहीं समझ में आता कि हम क्या करते हैं। जो लोग इस फिल्म को देखेंगे तो उनको अच्छे से समझ में आएगा कि हम दुनिया का कितना अनोखा काम कर रहे हैं, कितना बड़ा काम कर रहे हैं। उस पर मुझे गर्व है, अपनी टीम पर गर्व है। तो और सबसे ज़्यादा मैं खुश हूँ कि ये कहीं ना कहीं कैद है। कल के दिन मैं रहूँ ना रहूँ, टीम रहे ना रहे, लेकिन ये एक सीन रहेगी जो आने वाली पीढ़ी के लिए, आने वाले भविष्य के लिए बदलाव लाएगी। तो हाँ, बहुत अच्छी लगी ये फिल्म।
So this essentially is a gist of their reaction to the film. And a week later, Meera joins us at Sundance. And it was all primarily virtual that year for us. But I think it was important for us to actually, personally, you know, with all our indie projects, we build in a component of impact. Like, how do stories that we are telling lead to amplification of the participants who are part of those stories? Can we create strategies that amplify their work? And so we had done an impact run, which is soft, but that's another story. In 2018, that the journalists were a part of, it was a huge hit. And so we were like, the film's out in the world, we're going to bring them into these spaces that we are being invited in. And so, right from January, Meera joined us at Sundance, and then they joined us at the Columbia Journalism School to give a master class, all the way through to film festivals, conferences, and weirdly, I think, pivoting to pivoting to digital help, because they were sitting in Banda, we were in India, Delhi, and, you know, but they were participating in all of these spaces, Doha debates, etc. And I think with the kind of exposure that the film had momentum, and it picked up this it went on a run, as you said, and that was something that we couldn't anticipate. But also, when the world saw the journalists and the journalists engaging and interacting with them, it led to a certain moment that allowed for a certain kind of, you know, there's a shift that happens, you know, where people after watching a film go, what can I do? The Impact campaign was designed to actually streamline that what can you do into action points like partnerships, resources, financial, strategy, etc. So we were able to sort of like build a lot of that. Funds and substantial funds were raised, which led to Khabar Lahariya after nearly 20 years of operating out of UP, being able to expand to 3 new states, increase their team size. Meera joined us finally. There was a little window in 2021 at ITFA where Karan and Meera joined us at ITFA is the world's largest dog festival in Amsterdam. Imagine, and we had 5 screenings. One of the screenings is in this theater called the Tuschinski, which is known as the world's most beautiful film theater. It's almost like an opera. Imagine this space, imagine about 1,500 people, multiple levels, 3 levels, packed house. Film ends, Meera walks onto stage, everyone gets up, standing ovation. Meera holds Rintu's hand going, ye kya ho raha hai? But Meera being Meera goes, she whips out her phone and points it to the audience. People go wild. And then we have the most wonderful Q&A. And then every day that we were walking the streets, she was mobbed by people. Autograph, can I take a selfie? And she was just like, and you know, that's, I think, the power of the visual medium, that it, because when you're working in isolation in a certain part, she was just like, I didn't know, like, you know, हम ऐसा भी काम कर रहे जिससे लोग इतने प्रभावित हो जाएंगे. So that happened. The film got shortlisted. Khabar Lahariya celebrated that shortlist. Few months later, the film got nominated. Khabar Lahariya celebrated the nomination on the social media handles. And in fact, someone who's on the board of Khabar Lahariya went on to write a thought piece talking about the significance of this film for the institution and the importance of the film in the institution's own legacy. This is middle of Feb of 2022. 2 weeks later, Adityanath comes back to power for a second term. Khabar Lahariya reaches out to us saying, we need to redact all the political reportage in the film, or most of it. That is when the base hit on us, because we were just like, what are you talking about? It was like, ye sara change karna padega. And for us, like, the irony couldn't be struck harder, because you're looking at, and I've said this so many times, when you're in a democracy, and I truly believe we are still in a democracy, when you have independent journalists asking independent filmmakers to censor themselves, you know. But we went into a series of conversations. But the interesting thing was that there was a new set of leadership in place. We were dealing with people who had not been a part of these conversations for 6 years, and being asked to do things that we didn't truly believe in. But it was important for us to be able to engage with the institution and figure out what the anxiety was, because the film had not been brought back to India, and that was also part of the strategy. The exposure, being international, would allow for a certain level of protection to accumulate for their work and for them to be able to work in India. And that's exactly what happened. The strategy was to bring the film back to India once the film was, quote unquote, celebrated outside. Because it's.
Can I just interject, Sushmit? So I think my question goes back to the criticism being that you have only covered one political party, in this case being the BJP. And I think there's a very genuine case of, is it safe for the journalists? So I think maybe answer that. I mean, we know where we stand in terms of world press freedom. So
there was no other political party on the ground, and that's a fact. Anyone who's been in Uttar Pradesh 2017 onwards in the elections or in the MCD, there's no BSP, there's no SP, there's no Congress. And there's
meaning they're not campaigning, these parties?
They're dead campaigns. Like, so for instance, the last campaign that you saw of the BJP that Meera was reporting, the same ground one day before the Congress had campaigned, there were maybe like 50 people there. That is essentially what the ground reality is. And the Ram Navami celebration was something that used to be a very small celebration. 2019 is when it just like scaled up. And so our interest essentially was looking at how does an independent news institution led by Dalit women report in the times that we are in, because we are in a space where the media is dog whistling. And can this news institution independently report about the times? And that's exactly how Meera ends the film. In the future, people are going to be looking at our work, and we stood the test of time.
Where were you?
And so, and for me, that was incidental, you know, like this whole thing of aapne BJP ko dikha diya, hum sare parties ke dost hai, etc. For me, the hurt essentially was pulling back and saying that the film misrepresents who we are. But, you know, I see this as an act of self-preservation, I suppose. I suppose these are the times that we are in, and you move on, and yeah. And I continue to hope that the institution grows and sticks to the values that we saw when we were on the ground, when they were reported.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sushmit and Rintu. I'd like to open it up to audience questions now. And may I request all audience members to come to that mic. And we'll try and keep questions and answers brief, because we have till 9 p.m. here. 8:45.
Hi, thank you for the wonderful film. I've been following your journey for the last 4 years, and it's really remarkable to watch the film. So I have 2 questions. I'm sorry, Sandhya, I'm going to be brief. The first is, I understand the consent of the participants of the film, in the film, but I'm also asking, like, because they were shooting a lot of other people, So, because I noticed that one scene where the person, and I understand that you guys are questioning the power and all of that, like the organization is also trying to do that. But then where does consent come in play in all of that? And secondly, you guys said that you thought you want to shoot for 2 years, but then 4 years. Then where did you say that this is the hard stop, we want to end the film here? Okay. Okay, that's cool. The first answer.
I think for the first one, consent is everything. It's super important, especially when we're definitely in a situation of huge imbalance as filmmakers in spaces that are not ours, in realities that are not ours, and we symbolize promises that we are not making, but just by showing up, that's evident with our presence. So what we did was, depending on the space of trauma that we're in, either introduce ourselves up front, or once we've filmed, tell people what we're doing. So getting video consent. The whole idea of taking consent is still very complicated and nascent in India. So, dishing out a paper and asking people to sign makes them really nervous. And so helping them understand and getting that on video was super critical. So that's where we drew the line of their subjects and our participants. Everybody became our participant.
So another question.
Hi guys, congratulations on the film. I just wanted to ask, since you have followed them throughout their work, throughout their journey, did it ever feel like you have a positive interference on their work, like or negative interference? Positive interference as in they have an additional level of security because big city, big camera. Again, negative interference because they are not getting access to places they should have normally, if they didn't go with an additional level of people who are shooting them too. That's all.
I think in terms of just our presence, of course, it was a disruptive presence, and no matter how much you try to fit in, you're never going to fit in. And so we led with that energy, that we don't belong from this part. We are from Delhi, and we are making a film. So instead of sort of covering it, we led with that. In police stations, I would go and announce, sir, she's going to do an interview. May I please have your audio? Do you consent? And so when you announce, I feel people are much more comfortable. If we do it clandestine, then they think you're up to something. And even when that person saying don't shoot, and Sushmit's literally put the camera down, be cheeky, I made sure that you go back and say, this is what we're doing, do you want to see the footage? So that, because we will leave. Shamkali has to appear again next day. So we tried our best for not the local dynamics, which have been hard won, shouldn't be bothered because we are. Unintentionally, I'm pretty sure we must have upended a few things. But their protection, I never thought that they were feeling an additional level of protection because we were there. It always felt the other way around. Because no matter how much you work in other spaces and you're mindful, you are alien to that space. And a lot of things are not visible to you that are visible to a reporter from that region. Yeah.
We have 10 more minutes. They've come all the way from Delhi. Don't leave your questions for Instagram. Ask them now.
Hi, Rintu, Sushmit. Pleasure to see you both here. Huge fan of all the Black Ticket films, by the way. I'm sure you've been asked a lot of these questions over a lot of time, but any incident, and Sushmit mentioned one, that didn't make it to the final cut, which you think we should hear about?
So many. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick on this. Sunita's relationship with her father is a really beautiful one. And for me, that man is a true feminist. And there were so many scenes. This is one particular scene where Sunita gets her passport and she bolts to meet her father, who is basically a landless laborer. He's working in someone else's farm. It's a sunny day. She's running and she goes to him and he's just like, what are you doing here? And she's like, I got my passport. And he's like, what does that even mean? Sunita, who's very expressive, her face drops and she's like, Dad, like, I can travel outside the country on the basis of this one document. हमारे खानदान में किसी को आज तक नहीं मिला है. Father's expression changes, wipes his hand, and he pulls out this little plastic packet from inside his shirt and he wraps the thing saying, इसको तो ध्यान से रखो ना थोड़ा सा, like, and he wraps the whole thing and it's all played out in silences against like a sunset. Beautiful moment. That's it. It's just silence. Couldn't make the film. Yeah.
Don't look at me, I didn't take it out.
Yeah, that was one, but there were many. Like,
I would also say quickly Satyam, because we didn't want him to be this, you know, the Yuva Vahini leader. We didn't want it to be him to be this evil incarnate, you know, taking out his sword. Wanted him to have some kind of interiority, yet not make this a prachar for him, on platform him through the film. So he was the unexpected fourth character. We were already jostling with three. And there were many moments of him. He writes poetry to Yogi Adityanath in his textbook, handwritten with his Yogi Ji's photos in the thing. It's really serious business. And whereas one time he's just narrating a poem and it begins to rain and there's thunder outside. We did not put it on post. It actually happened. And it just felt like, you know, another film needed to be just a shot on him would be powerful. We tried a lot to put it in, but he was just taking too much space. So lots of such moments. Yeah.
I really got to commend the courage your entire team took to put this together. It puts me to shame, thinking of me being scared of getting in front of camera, behind the camera. And here I'm seeing some amazing individuals make such brilliant pieces of content without even realizing how to operate or even type. So thank you, it reassures individuals like me. I want to ask, when did you took almost 2.5 times more time to complete the entire project. So when you got stuck, whom did you reach out to and why? Yeah.
like, I mean, because, you know, when you're in the process of putting a film together, sometimes it becomes very difficult to explain what you're looking for from a story, you know? It's like being in a relationship with your film. There are ups and downs and swings, and sometimes you feel a certain way about. And I think we were lucky that we were both working together on the project, because we'd get stuck, and we've figured out, like, in the 15 years that we've making films, that both in the production and post-production, you're going to hit a sine curve. Like, you know, there's going to be great exuberance energy, you're getting a lot of material, and then you've got your best material, and then you're not getting anything, and then it just goes down, and you're waiting for days.
Yeah, I'm in that slump right now, yeah.
Yeah. Gia, hold the ground. This is going to happen again, you know? It's just a matter of, like, yeah, but we would not sort of get stuck in talking to others about the film. We had a lot of friends who knew about the characters, and then they would philosophize about life. We have a lot of older friends who are in their 60s, and they would talk about men and women and life and marriage, and those conversations were little epiphanies for us on how to sort of. Very quickly, example. So we were stuck on, like, building this arc of the newspaper and this external journey of these three characters, and everything is like motion, movement. And this gentleman was like, you idiots, do you see Meera? Like, her internal struggle. And I was like, I don't see it. And it's like, but her as the mother, as the wife, as the caregiver of the home, you need to focus on that. And we were just like, but there's no energy in those scenes. And he's like, it doesn't matter. And so then we started looking, like, what is Meera in the space of her own silence? I don't know what that means, but then when we started waiting for it, we got these beautiful moments. So that argument that she has with her husband is actually one of those moments where we're just filming them having a conversation, it just erupts, you know? So, yeah, I know I haven't answered your question, but like, that's what we did,
You want to chime in too?
I think let's get another question.
Yeah.
So this may not have anything to do with the film, but since you spent so much time doing this, let's see if you can answer this. My hero, late Christopher Hitchens, was a big fan of Indian democracy. He used to think of it as, a multicultural civilization. Do you think we are moving away from that, like in real, because that's what the film portrays, and I have a feeling we are doing that. And second is, I'm a vegan. There's too many mentions of Gau Mata. Do you think one day I'll be forced to remove my real mother's name and put Gau Mata over there?
I think we've never been a perfect democracy, but we were getting somewhere. And now our thought has been, held, has not been. But honestly, I don't have a direct answer to, I don't know if anybody in this room or outside would. But just working, breathing in the India of post-2014, both of us have had our moments of being very cynical, very dejected, what is the point of anything moments. And I feel like making this film, meeting the women, just really, thinking through what we want this to be has been an oxygen. And making a film that can be watched, debated, critiqued, celebrated has been extremely meaningful. Is this a perfect film? I don't think so. 10 years from now, I'd be able to still pick out flaws. But is this the best version of itself that I am happy to stand by? Sure. And I feel like that has been what were you doing? I think that's the question that Meera asks. What were they doing? What was I doing? What are you doing? And that's really, and I would say seek out independent media in this country and fund them. Because they are our first and last line of defense. They need support. Yaar, Gau Mata, matlab, I'm like Satyam sitting in front of me. I'm born Christian saying, Isai to sare Hindu hi the. Like that assaults my sense of identity. Gau Mata is incidental. It's just a symbolism of much darker things. But we've all developed a thick hide around these things and continue to resist. And like the women at Khabalaria, I think this moment demands creative resistance from us and languaging in a way that's different from what we are fighting. And that's the effort. We may fail, but we may rise above this. Thank you so much. I want to thank a big shout out to BIC and Vikalp for doing not 1, 2 screenings that, it means so much to us, so much. Huge thanks for all of you turning up so late in the evening to watch the film. Thank you. Can we wrap up?
Can we wrap up and you can ask them question later? Yeah? Okay. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And my last comment, I think, Rintu and Sushmit, is this is one of the most uplifting films I've seen on rural India. It's not for me that when the country was changing, where were you? But actually, this is a film of the changing Indian woman. And I think it's been a phenomenal document showing that change. Thank you.